Hi, my name is Emma, and I'm the Senior Planning and Policy Officer at Kent Wildlife Trust. Part of my role involves reviewing and commenting on planning applications across Kent, and it's no surprise that in the last few years we have seen an increase in solar farm applications. Some are small and localised, whilst others are large and more intrusive to the surrounding landscape and biodiversity. To decarbonise our energy sector, we obviously need to build new infrastructure, and solar energy is one of the most critical ways to tackle climate change. But as we accelerate development across the countryside, an important question emerges. Can solar farms deliver clean energy whilst also protecting or even enhancing nature? The answer is not a simple yes or no. It depends almost entirely on one factor, where we put them. When we talk about solar and biodiversity, we often focus on mitigation, landscaping, or biodiversity net gain. But in reality, the single most important decision happens much earlier. Location matters more than mitigation. If we place solar farms in the wrong landscapes, no amount of enhancement can fully undo that decision. In Kent, we are typically seeing a lot of proposed solar farms on coastal farmland, marshes, and local wildlife sites. And this is because these habitats tend to be less suitable for housing developments. They are often in flood risk zones, have poor ground conditions, are remote from major settlements, or fall within protected landscapes where residential development would face strong policy constraints. So from a planning perspective, that can make them appear easier sites for energy infrastructure. A local wildlife site, for example, can sometimes be perceived as a constraint for a landowner, especially when they are wanting to sell that land. So securing permission for permanent built development, such as housing, would result in irreversible habitat loss on a local wildlife site, which is typically difficult and carries a high risk of refusal. However, in contrast, solar farms are frequently presented as temporary and reversible developments. Panels can, in theory, be removed after 30 or 40 years and the land returned to its previous use. The solar farm proposals are often framed that the sites can still have continued agricultural use by using animal grazing as a biodiversity enhancement measure. And it's because of this that they often do get approved on important ecological sites, such as local wildlife sites and functional linked land. However, from an ecological standpoint, 30 or 40 years is not temporary in any meaningful sense. 40 years represents multiple generations from many species. And if we build a solar farm within a local wildlife site, the decades of shading, altered management, construction disturbance, and changes in species composition can fundamentally change its ecological character. This is why strategic spatial planning is so important. Renewable energy development should not default to the land that is hardest to develop for other uses. It should prioritise land where biodiversity enhancement is realistic and where we are not adding pressure to landscape that are already critical for nature recovery. Another consideration is cumulative impacts. One solar farm might have limited or no significant impact to nature, but wildlife does not experience development in isolation. When multiple schemes are consented across the same area, their combined impact can reshape an entire ecological network. In Kent, we are seeing clusters of large-scale solar proposals in certain parts of the county, particularly where there is grid capacity. Individually, each scheme may demonstrate mitigation measures, buffers, landscaping, and biodiversity net gain, but collectively they can reduce the total amount of open foraging habitat for wildlife, fragment previously continuous landscapes, introduce repeated disturbance during construction phases, create physical barriers to movement through fencing and infrastructure, and change the character of large open landscapes relied upon by ground nesting birds. For example, overwintering birds associated with coastal SPAs don't just use one field, they use networks of fields across wide areas. So if multiple solar farms are installed across that network, even if each only occupies part of a holding, the overall carrying capacity of the landscape can reduce, which has a potential knock-on effect to the integrity of the SPA. The same applies to ground nesting bird species like skylark. One development may displace a small handful of territories, but several developments across the same landscape can lead to a measurable local population decline. There's also the issue of functional habitat loss. Even where land between parcels remains vegetated, its ecological function may change. Shading alters plant communities, regular maintenance changes sward structure, and the presence of infrastructure alters predator dynamics. These subtle shifts can accumulate over time. The challenge is that our planning system tends to assess schemes site by site, while strategic landscape scale assessment is often weaker than it should be. Without a coordinated spatial planning informed by local nature recovery strategies and ecological opportunity mapping, we risk consenting a series of acceptable small schemes that together result in significant ecological decline. A high-profile example here in Kent is Cleve Hill, one of the UK's largest solar developments. Cleve Hill is located on the North Kent marshes, adjacent to the Swale, an internationally designated site for birds. The development site itself and the surrounding landscape supports important populations of overwintering and breeding birds, including marsh harrier, lapwing, and Brent geese. And whilst the project went through extensive assessment and mitigation, it's been controversial because of concerns about habitat loss, landscape change, and potential impacts on bird assemblages associated with designated sites. One specific concern in relation to Cleve Hill and other solar farms proposed in coastal landscapes is what's called lake effect. Solar panels can reflect polarised light, which may be perceived by wading birds as water. So in coastal and marsh landscapes, this raises the risk of birds being attracted into unsuitable areas, potentially increasing collision risk, exhaustion, or altered behaviour, particularly during migration. So the impacts of Cleve Hill are still unknown. The solar park has only recently become operational, so the monitoring surveys will provide insight into how much this large-scale coastal solar farm has impacted species and whether there has been any real biodiversity enhancements. On the other hand, location also determines opportunity. If we are strategic about where solar is placed, there is real potential for it to contribute positively to biodiversity. It's important to recognise that land across the southeast is under enormous pressure. We need space for food production, housing, nature recovery, and obviously energy infrastructure. This means trade-offs are unavoidable. For many landowners, including farmers, estates, and other rural businesses, solar represents an opportunity to diversify income and create financial stability in a changing economic climate. And that stability can support long-term land stewardship and resilience. So at the same time, there are understandable concerns about land use balance, particularly around food production and the cumulative footprint of solar across the countryside. But this is why location matters so much. When solar is directed towards land that has lower ecological value, such as intensive farming, previously developed land, industrial land, or areas that are less sensitive from a biodiversity perspective, there is genuine opportunity for environmental improvement. In those contexts, solar farms can reduce land management intensity, create long-term grassland cover, restore hedgerows and boundary features, introduce habitat mosaics, and provide undisturbed areas within otherwise busy landscapes. So over a 30-40-year operational lifespan, that can represent a significant period of stable habitat compared to many alternative land uses. If done well, solar can form part of a multifunctional landscape, contributing to climate mitigation while strengthening ecological networks. done poorly, can simply shift pressures from one land use to another. One of the biggest challenges is that many of the ecological impacts of solar farms are still relatively under-researched. Solar development is accelerating rapidly, but the ecological evidence base is still catching up. In many cases, we are building faster than we are learning. That makes long-term monitoring and adaptive management absolutely essential. This leads me to my next case study, Broxted Solar Park, which is a medium-scale solar farm in Suffolk, which is being monitored by Suffolk Wildlife Trust and is a rare example of where we have a decade of monitoring data. Very quickly, Broxted Estate was historically a deer park, which was then used for farming for generations up until the Second World War, where it was then transformed into an airfield. By the early 90s, the grassland had self-established as species-rich grassland with various orchid and notable botanical species, as well as becoming an important habitat for overwintering and breeding birds, resulting in it qualifying as a county wildlife site. And in 2012, the owners obtained planning permission for the 35 megawatt solar farm, which was approved to be built within the county wildlife site. Today, Broxted Solar Park consists of 120,000 solar panels, which the arrays have been designed to be at least 7 metres apart and a minimum of 90 centimetres off the ground. This is to allow a suitable amount of space for sheep grazing. And as the solar park is built within the County Wildlife Park, 20 hectares of compensation grassland was identified off-site, but still within the immediate surrounding landscape and land ownership. And since its construction, there's been annual monitoring of protected species and botanical surveys, which feed into annual reporting and review so any management actions can take place. So overall, the monitoring surveys have shown that there has been a decline in the abundance of botanical species, invertebrates, ground nesting birds and bats within the boundary of the solar farm. Sheep grazing has helped to break up tall fescue dominance and create corridors of more diverse grassland. However, overall, the grassland has lost a lot of herb species such as orchids, meadow vetulin, knapweed, and has been replaced with more shade-tolerant grass species such as rough meadow grass, Yorkshire fog, and creeping bent. Pre-development, the site was used by breeding skylark, and sadly, despite the solar arrays being designed to be at least 7 metres apart, breeding skylark never returned. This is really important as a lot of proposed solar farms claim that ground nesting birds will return to breed between the arrays post-development, but we've now got evidence that sadly this isn't the case. And interestingly, monitoring has reported no bat foraging or commuting within or immediately around the solar arrays, despite the hedgerows and woodland edges. So that raised really important unanswered questions. Could solar farms interfere with bat echolocation? Could there be acoustic or electromagnetic effects that we don't yet understand? So at the moment, we simply don't know, and that highlights the importance of long-term monitoring and scientific research. Despite this decline, has the development delivered any meaningful nature recovery? Well, thankfully, the answer is yes. Biodiversity outside the solar arrays has increased significantly. Farmland bird species such as yellowhammer, turtle dove, and meadow pipit have all increased in numbers and abundance outside of the solar farm, with yellowhammer and meadow pipit also being recorded in higher numbers within the solar farm compared to pre-development numbers, likely due to the restored hedgerows and scrub at the site boundaries. Off-site, a mosaic of habitats has been created and restored. The addition of scrapes and ponds has seen an increase in amphibians and foraging bats. The compensatory grassland has thrived, which has seen a huge increase in butterfly and moth species, as well as reptiles, brown hare, and birds of prey. So yes, there has been a decline in biodiversity on site. However, the site before the solar farm was an important ecological habitat and designated county wildlife site. So arguably, it probably wasn't the best location for a solar farm in the first instance. If the solar farm had been built on an intensively farmed field or previously developed brownfield with low biodiversity value, would it have seen an increase in biodiversity under the same management? Most likely it would have. It's clear from the monitoring surveys that biodiversity offsite has seen an increase in overall biodiversity and benefits to wildlife. This means solar farms can deliver meaningful biodiversity gains, but only when there is enough land and commitment to do it properly. Sadly, not every solar farm is going to have the adjacent resources to do this. So can solar farms deliver for nature? Yes, I think they can, but only if we get a few things right. First, the right locations. We need to avoid high-value habitats and functioning linked land. Second, we need genuine biodiversity enhancement that is secured for the lifetime of the project. And third, we need long-term monitoring and adaptive management so we learn from what we build. This shouldn't be framed as an energy versus nature. The real challenge is designing landscapes where climate action and biodiversity recovery happen together. I think next we've got Gemma from Buglife.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm sure someone will let me know if they can't. Yeah, so I'm just going to provide a bit more of an insight into the impacts from solar development on invertebrates, what we know at the moment. I'm a saving sites officer at Buglife, so I work on a lot of our planning casework across the UK. So I've been involved in writing a lot of responses to solar planning applications. At the moment, I can't move my slides on. I can't. Are you going to do? Someone done that for me. Thank you. Yeah. So Buglife's position is very much along the lines of what Emma was saying, is that location for solar farms is really important when it comes to whether invertebrates are going to benefit overall or whether there could be really negative impacts. So we've got a whole broad suite depending on the location of the site and what is proposed in terms of their possible habitat creation and habitat management of what's going to happen for invertebrates. When we object to planning applications for solar farms, it's usually the case that we are concerned about important aquatic invertebrate populations, and I'll explain about that in a moment. But we also do have a red line really when it comes to protected sites. In our planning casework, this has been more of an issue in the Gwent levels in Wales, where we've got multiple sites of special scientific interest that are being threatened with solar development. And we just believe that they're protected sites for nature, and they're not, they shouldn't be subject to development proposals, no matter what that proposal promises to deliver. And we have concerns around, as Emma was talking about there as well, those high value habitats that are often designated as local wildlife sites as well. And certainly with invertebrates, we've got a lot more that we need to know. So that's something I'm going to touch on as well. So if I can have the next slide, because I still, thank you. So yeah, this very much echoes some of what Emma was saying. For invertebrates, where we've got low value habitats to start with that example of arable farmland, there's a real opportunity that a solar farm could deliver much better habitats, which would obviously see increased species diversity and abundance, which obviously then would benefit a lot of other wildlife as well as the invertebrates themselves. But this needs to be well planned and well implemented to be successful. Firstly, when you've got a comparison with intensely managed farmland, obviously a solar farm is going to have a lot less chemical inputs. We do know of solar farms that are still using herbicides, but overall there's going to be a lot less of pesticides, which obviously are so damaging to insect populations. And then when it comes to habitat creation, we often do see a sort of trend for developers to look to try and create wildflower-rich habitats. And this obviously is incredibly beneficial if successful for pollinators. And if some of you listening may be aware of Buglife's Buglife's beelines. The whole idea of this is to try and get wildflower-rich corridors across the UK to allow invertebrates to move through the landscape, because it is very difficult in many areas for invertebrates to move through our modern landscapes. So solar farms have that potential, if designed well, to help that happen. And again, things like planting new hedgerows, or allowing hedgerows to become more mature and bushy. Hedgerows is also important places for pollinators, and obviously provide shelter and structural habitat for invertebrates. And the management of these sites that may involve mowing or grazing can be designed for biodiversity gains. Aside from just maintaining a solar farm, the focus can be on that, if that developer decides to take that route. And again, there's those opportunities for connectivity. So by linking any new hedgerows up into the landscape, allowing these corridors to link up with other surrounding areas can be really beneficial for inverts. So next slide, please. So where we've got real concerns around solar is to do with polarised light, which Emma mentioned with regards to birds. This is because aquatic invertebrates have evolved for this environmental cue of seeing horizontal polarised light as an indication of a really good water body to lay their eggs in. So basically, they're seeing the world in a different way to us. And they see this polarized light, and they see it as a sign for them to go and lay their eggs there. And unfortunately, solar panels are a really strong source of horizontal polarized light. So you can understand what's going to happen is invertebrates are going to be attracted away from natural water bodies to this much stronger source of polarized light. And then they also do lay their eggs on the panels, which ultimately then fail because obviously it's not water. So this is really established science that this is how aquatic invertebrates choose their egg laying sites. But what's missing from the research is what is the impact of solar farms on this in terms of like the population level effects on invertebrates. So that's a real gap that we will be trying to fill and trying to get answers to. But obviously there's the potential with the scale of some of the solar farms we're seeing, and as we've said, the cumulative effects of solar farms for this to be quite a big impact potentially. So how does this get addressed in planning applications at the moment? Well, a lot of the time it doesn't get mentioned at all. Obviously, the site has to have wetland features as a starting point, but even where we've seen sites with a lot of wetland features, such as Stone Street Solar Site, they often don't talk about polarised light as an impact on invertebrates, or they try and explain it away as being something that's not important for particular groups. So at Stone Street Solar, for example, they had done some aquatic invertebrate sampling and they didn't get many mayflies. So they said, we don't really need to mitigate for this because we haven't got a lot of mayflies, and they're the ones that are really attracted to polarised light. But this isn't the case. As we can see, just from the photographs that I've chosen here, nearly all groups of aquatic insects that you can think of are attracted to this polarised light. So dragonflies, water beetles, water bugs, true flies, mayflies, they're all affected. So obviously we don't know the detail for every species, but it's a very, very broad trend across many, many groups of invertebrates. So what do we ask developers to do? At the moment, we have been suggesting that they consider modifications to panels. This is something we've been asking for a while. Research has shown that by putting a system of white lines, sort of gridding pattern onto solar panels, it can substantially reduce the amount of polarised light. And recent research, which is quite exciting, is also showing that textured surfaces can be really helpful in reducing this effect. And that is particularly exciting because it's also indications that it actually increases energy consumption, because obviously any modification to panels, even the white gridding, will have some impact on energy production, but this textured surface seems to be something that maybe will actually be beneficial to the solar industry. But unfortunately, we're not at a stage where those panels are commercially available. And again, this is obviously then something that needs to be thought about for the future. So at the moment, really, that only really leaves us with a couple of options. One is location. Don't site large solar farms, or don't site these solar panels in important sensitive wetland habitats, particularly with nationally important invertebrate populations. So we have an example there of Romney Marsh, which is one of our important invertebrate areas. So that's somewhere where we know we've got nationally important aquatic invertebrates. That's probably not going to be an application that Buglife would be able to support because of the location. But also there is scope, depending on the site, for panels to be sited sufficiently enough away from water features to at least reduce the impacts on aquatic invertebrates. So this has to be quite substantial buffer. It would need to probably be in the region of about 300 metres. But we do believe that would, for a lot of species, would be helpful to site these panels further away. So yeah, if we can just move on to the final slide, please. So yeah, I've already mentioned some of the gaps in our knowledge around polarised lights, and the fact that, yeah, we haven't just got a nice simple answer at the moment for the solar industry to, for example, use a modified panel. But we're seeing other issues for invertebrates in these applications, and one of them is just lack of assessment, which is common for invertebrates across the planning. In planning applications, they often don't get considered very well. Not all sites require invertebrate surveys, but quite often they just don't. The knowledge of what is actually there to start with can be quite poor, and that obviously will probably result in poor outcomes for invertebrates. We also see a trend in mitigation for habitat loss that might happen to be mitigated for by smaller areas of habitats that are better, enhanced habitats. And this is concerning, one, because that enhancement doesn't always happen or isn't always successful. But obviously smaller areas is not generally going to be beneficial for nature recovery. And that's certainly the case for many invertebrates that need large areas to be able to forage and to get the resources that they need. And again, I think the poor delivery of some of the promises that are made for applications, again, is a very general trend in planning of does it actually happen? Is it successful? What happens if something isn't successful? There just isn't really the enforcement and the sort of monitoring that we'd want to see. And on the sort of research side as well, we do have concerns over the fact that we don't really know how specialised species, maybe some of our rarer and declining species, cope with these novel landscapes that solar farms create. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered, but we're very keen to make this something that we're focusing on in the coming few years, because obviously like I say, it's an important renewable energy source. We can see that it could bring benefits, but yeah, we really need to look at the whole picture. If you just go to the next slide, and I'll say thank you for listening, and I'm going to pass on to Paul now from the RSPB.
Thank you, Emma and Gemma. Hi, my name's Paul, and I work for the RSPB in the Business Conservation Advice team, working directly with our partners. And our priority is to work with A select few companies developing solar farms in a nature positive way, ensuring they avoid sensitive areas, protect key habitats, and deliver long-term management that benefits biodiversity and priority species, and always fulfilling our charitable objective to promote the conservation of biodiversity and the natural environment by conserving birds and wildlife. Can I have the next slide, please, Emma? Thank you. So climate change is the greatest long-term threat to wildlife and people. We're working to make sure action is taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a nature-friendly way while helping wildlife to adapt to the changes in climate. Without rapidly cutting our greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors of the economy, we won't stop the nature or climate crisis. The State of Nature report shows that far too many species are threatened with extinction in Great Britain, with climate change and intensive land use among the leading drivers of that. Urgent action is needed to move to a lower carbon economy, but the renewable energy rollout cannot come at the expense of nature. We advocate for new solar farms to be planned within a strategic and spatial approach, avoiding sensitive locations in favour of areas where they can also contribute to the UK's nature recovery targets. Next slide, please. Thank you. A nature positive approach will ensure we have more nature at the end of the decade when we started, halting declines and driving recovery. We're calling for the widespread rollout of rooftop solar combined with new solar farms planned using a strategic and spatial approach in areas of low risk to nature and low grade agricultural land. Our research indicates that with careful planning, it should be possible to meet the UK's climate targets using high levels of renewable energy whilst avoiding significant negative impacts. Next slide, please. At the RSPB, we've had over a 10-year history of renewable solar energy across our estates on a small scale. Here are some examples of how the technology has been rolled out on our reserves and buildings. And we all have to rapidly scale up towards a decarbonising economy. If you could click, please. Thank you. At the smaller end of the scale, or the smallest end of the scale, solar satellite tags have successfully been used for over 10 years to research bird migration, working in partnerships across the world. One turtle dove travelled from Suffolk to West Africa using 500 kilometres each day and returning to the same thick hedgerow to next again the following spring. Next slide, please. If you could click again and again and again. Thank you. Thank you. It's important that developments are in the right place. It's important to engage early in the planning process to have your say and that sites are being assessed and evaluated appropriately. Whilst the RSPB has partnerships with a select few companies and shares advice from the early stages, as a general rule, we aim to select cases where we have the greater impact and make the greatest contribution to saving the very best places for nature. Some cases where our interests Some cases where our interests may trigger involvement is where there's a significant threat to internationally important sites for wildlife, or a serious threat to the interest of nature reserve, or a high risk of setting a damaging legal, scientific or policy precedent. We work collaboratively with other NGOs to make sure we're using the best of limited resources and provide a clear environmental input together. However, to get the best outcomes from nature, it's important that local people engage with the planning process, which is why we've developed resources to support more people like you to take action with our Planning for Nature Toolkit. And as you will hopefully be aware, there is support for the Kent and Sussex Planning Networks for Nature, which brings together a range of tools, advice and guidance for environmental non-government organisations and community groups. Next slide, please. Where solar farms are planned using a strategic and spatial approach on sites with low biodiversity baselines, we can expect a high biodiversity net gain. If you could click, please. It's important that the proposed pre-development habitats are assessed and valued appropriately. Sites such as these provide exciting opportunities to not only recover and improve habitats, but also embed priority species recovery. Our research has shown that biodiversity gains can be greatest when intensively managed land is converted into natural habitat, with growing evidence of how solar farms can boost pollinator numbers. Always check the documents for the biodiversity game plan to ensure the commitment to nature is embedded in the operational phase. As you can see, the orange is the 10% legal by BNG minimum, and these are the number of sites that have greatly surpassed that. Next click, please. There are multiple ways that collaborating with solar developments can result in positive changes, from supporting wider nature-friendly practices on the surrounding farmland to at least 10 to 30% of the project dedicated to the creation of new habitats, with commitments towards nature-positive management for 30 years or more. Next slide, please. As the largest area of habitat in a solar farm development, it's really important to get the right native seeds for the local conditions and the appropriate management plan in place. The creation of other neutral grassland around the solar panels is achievable. It's not easy to create diverse wildflower meadows. Oh, just go back, thank you. It's not easy to create diverse wildflower meadows on previously intensive arable soils. It's also important for monitoring to be in place to check the progress is on track and to share good practice. For instance, replacing ryegrass seed with cocksfoot grass seed suddenly creates the potential opportunity for several species of butterfly to colonise the site, including a small percentage of native bird's foot trefoil could create habitat for several blue butterflies and even dingy skippers if there's connectivity in the landscape at the right location. Next slide, please. Our partners include the planting of new hedgerows, and we've seen between 1 and 39 kilometres per project. Planting the gaps in hedgerows, diversifying and allowing the hedges to grow thicker and taller all contributes towards benefits for nature. Hedgerows can be used to connect fragmented woodlands and to benefit many species of birds, small mammals, and in the right locations, they can facilitate the recovery of species such as white-lettered hairstreak and brown hairstreak. Next slide, please. And if you could click again, please. Where we can, we advocate the creation of ponds in suitable locations, incredibly important for biodiversity and supporting many of our farmland birds through the summer with drinking water and highly nutritious aquatic insects. Unlocking private sector funds to deliver nature-based solutions to a more nature-positive economy. Next slide, please. Wetlands provide multiple benefits for nature. Swallows and house martins arriving back after a long winter in Africa need access to wet mud for nest building and an abundance of insects. Spotted flycatchers were much commoner when I was younger, but have suffered serious and significant declines, down by 67% since the 1990s. Research tells us how important aquatic insects are to their breeding success. And did you know they're up to a quarter of a swift's diet consists of non-biting midges, and these start off in their larval stages in aquatic and damp habitats. But, as Gemma mentioned, we have to consider where they are sited in relation to the panels. Next slide, please. Many of our farmland birds have declined due to the lack of highly nutritious annual seeds through the year and the insects that they support. Research has shown that with the decline of many of our annual plants associated with farmland, species such as turtle doves shift their diets towards more cultivated crops and supplementary feeding, which could reduce their body condition and may even impact fledging success. Fumitory, scarlet pimpernel and chickweeds are all really important for turtle doves during the summer months. We promote the inclusion of flower and seed-rich areas for our farmland birds, such as corn bunting, grey partridge, skylark, yellowhammer and linnets. Next slide, please. Our farmland birds have significantly declined by 61% since the 1970s. But the good news is the RSPB's conservation evidence by my colleagues shows that solar farms with habitats are more likely to support a high density and abundance of birds, including several of our most threatened species of concern. Here the graph has been divided into conservation status of birds, with amber and red listed birds being the most seriously threatened birds. Our greatest wins can be achieved through early inclusion in the planning and design, but also it is possible to improve basic solar farms already in operation, and where there is a will, there is a way. Next slide, please. And from that conservation evidence research, we expect these priority red and amber listed species to benefit from solar farm developments managed well for nature. And just imagine what we can do when we pull together. Next slide, please. If you could click again, please. The best practice guidelines by BirdLife Europe, RSPB Policy Briefing and Natural England Review all highlight the need for both pre-construction and post-construction monitoring of sites in order to effectively study their impacts on birds to allow solar farms to be correctly sited to avoid sensitive areas. Skylarks are red-listed threatened species and one that the research tells us we have to have more consideration when it comes to development. They avoid nesting near structures, they're ground nested, and their chicks are vulnerable to disturbance and predation. Their chicks require a good supply of insects, and in arable situations, a pair may need to have at least 3 broods in a season just to maintain the local population. Further research is needed to understand the relationship with skylarks and solar farm developments. Next slide, please. Here we have an example of skylark plots in an arable situation. And again, our research has shown that these can improve a local skylark density as opposed to conventional practices. It's a relatively simple solution, developed and tested by our experts, small areas, 16 metres squared, 2 per hectare over a minimum of 5 hectares, where the seed drill is momentarily turned on and off again to create a bare patch. The RSPB works with farmers and solar farm developments, and there are exciting opportunities to develop this further, working with farmers for nature-friendly outcomes, but it's not always that straightforward. Next slide, please. Sheep are cost-effective ways for solar farm operators to maintain the grassland and maintain links with the land to the farming, agrovoltaics. There can also be some mutual benefits for nature, but my colleagues have found that sheep like eating ground nesting birds' eggs. As well as that, we have research where we expect even grazing lightly with sheep to reduce the skylark territories compared to fallow or cereals. But the birds could well benefit from the increase in insects on solar farms. So it's important for nature conservation that the management includes periods during the spring and summer with no grazing of livestock, at least for parts of the site, to allow native plants to flower, set seed, and thicker tussocky areas for invertebrates and small mammals to breed and young birds to hide. Next slide, please. Here we have an example of a solar farm that's gone through the planning, and this is Lung Pasture Solar Farm near Darlington, County Durham. It received planning permission in 2023. Working in partnership with Light Rock Power since 2021, the RSPB has seen what can be achieved with early engagement and companies that share our objectives. Habitats to be created and enhanced include areas of wildflower grassland, a wider enhancement area, enhanced field margins, the provision of wild bird seed strips, a sustainable drainage system with a pond to be managed for wildlife, and additional woodland and hedgerow planting. Next slide, please. This is a site that's operational, Yelvertoft Solar Farm, an 80-hectare site in Northamptonshire, powering up to 15,000 homes and designed by Light Rock Power, developed by Bluefield. Policy into practice and allowing further research opportunities to gather evidence-based information. Pre-development, flooding was a major concern from the public consultation. Reverting arable to grassland is evidence to reduce soil loss and flooding. In addition to that, a series of swales have been incorporated into the design, holding and slowly releasing water in large basins during a flood event. Flooding of the next village and the road appears to have been alleviated since the site was constructed. Nature-based solutions in action. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. During August 2025, the site was alive with common blue butterflies breeding. Clouded yellow butterflies nectaring amongst the solar panels. Can you click, please, twice? 3 species of dragonfly and damselflies breeding in the pond, a grass snake, grasshoppers, bush crickets in the swales, and this is rebuilding biodiversity and diversity in our environment for the potential recovery of other struggling species. Click again, please. And again, please. The RSPB backs a more strategic and spatial approach to planning for energy developments across all 4 nations, and for such approach to protect sites that are sensitive for nature. It should be noted that our research identifies while spatial planning can provide initial guidance for selection and zoning, the need for good quality habitat regulations assessments and environmental impact assessments remains paramount, as they can greatly improve outcomes for nature. Next slide, please. We need to continue to improve the ecological evidence base, particularly where research is currently limited for certain groups and species. Next slide, please. At the right site and the right location, we can champion species such as turtle doves, and we've already included features to help support these in 3 of our projects, supporting wider collaboration across the farming landscape. Targeted action for one species typically benefits multiple other species too. Next slide, please. And we all work for the same objectives, whether it's thriving plants, insects, birds, mammals, reptiles, they're all connected as we are. Take the redback shrike, once widespread, but with dramatic declines almost to the point of extinction in the UK as a breeding bird. From a study in Poland, bees, wasps, grasshoppers and bush crickets make almost 98% of the diet. However, on cold and wet days, it switches to invertebrates, and these can account for almost 30% of the diet. And these are really important as a balanced availability of prey. The loss of diversity and abundance of species in our landscape is a major driver in the decline of many of our once widespread species higher up the ecosystem. And from a study of 32 solar farms in Slovakia, evidence demonstrates that redback shrikes and tree sparrows can positively benefit from solar farms. Next slide, please. In the long term, renewable energy can help us transition towards a more decarbonised economy, and in the shorter term, when developed in the right place with nature, solar farms offer an opportunity to enhance biodiversity and target priority species recovery. Rolling out renewable energy infrastructure at pace is vital to meet our net zero ambitions in the UK, but it's critical that measures to tackle climate change do not unintentionally worsen the nature crisis. When we work together and do it well, the transition to a decarbonised economy can help to support and even catalyst nature recovery across the UK. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul, Emma and Gemma, for those really interesting presentations, which cover the full range of issues and opportunities for solar farms. We've got a number of questions, so I'll kick off with a question from Stuart Corner, who is a beekeeper. I will attempt to bring Stuart in to ask his question, which I think probably is most relevant to Gemma. Stuart, we should be able to hear you.
Hello.
Hi, Stuart. You had a question about bees, I think.
Yes, I'm a beekeeper with an apiary on a solar farm, and I was just wondering if there's any evidence of honeybees affected by the polarised light coming off the panels.
I don't know of any evidence. I don't know if that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't. All the the comments and the sort of research that we've seen has been around solely aquatic invertebrates, because obviously there's that understandable evolutionary cue for them there to find water. So I suppose, yeah, I don't know whether I suppose all invertebrates possibly, well, not all, but a lot of species would obviously maybe need cues to find water. But I think because it's the aquatic invertebrates reproductive strategy, I think it's just obviously incredibly strong for them. So yeah, I don't know about honeybees, I'm afraid.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. Because honeybees do use polarized light to navigate.
Oh, right. Okay.
Amongst other things, that's not their only means of navigation. But so I was just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it's possibly, I mean, when I mentioned about terrestrial invertebrate impacts, it might be an area that we just don't really know, how and at what scale a solar farm might disrupt something like navigation. I think that's still a query for other wildlife as well. So yeah, I think it's maybe something that it'd be good to know more about.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Next, we have a question from Nicola about the scoping stage. I will try and bring Nicola in. Where are we? A lot of people on the call. Let's find Nicola. Hi, Nicola. We should be able to hear you.
Hang on, I'm just unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay, yeah. I used to work for Q at the seed bank, and we always done a scoping before we did any sort of like digging or seed collection. I'm just wondering, do they do an actual scoping of an area for the plants and the seeds before they actually start to put up the solar panels? And is there a limit to the size of them as well?
Emma, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Yeah, so with planning applications, so if before a planning application is submitted, and it doesn't matter whether it's a solar farm or housing, they have to go through various ecological surveys. So quite often, the first survey is done as what's called kind of a phase one, where ecologists go out on site and map the habitats on site. And then from that survey, they identify whether further protected species surveys are needed. So solar farms should always have ecology surveys done prior to the application. And then from those surveys, that's where you identify mitigation measures or compensation measures. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the kind of the last part of the question.
Just wondered if there's a limit to the size of a solar farm, is there a minimum and a maximum of the size? Because some of them seem so huge.
Yeah, not to my knowledge. Obviously, people can have just a couple panels in their back garden. People can have very small personal solar farms, and then you get these much larger, you know, solar farms like Cleeve Hill. And I can't remember the exact size off the top of my head, but depending on the size, it will go from a normal planning application to a nationally significant infrastructure project,
Yeah.
abbreviated to an NSIP. So that follows a different planning process. But Stone Street, that I think it was Gemma, did you mention Stone Street? That was an NSIP, so that followed a different planning process because of the size of it. I don't think Cleeve Hill was an NSIP. Oh no, it must have been because it's one of the biggest. So yeah, sorry, it was before my time. So yeah, that was an NSIP as well. Again, because of the size. But yeah, from the top of my head, I can't remember what that threshold is. I don't know if
I,
Okay. Thank you.
Emma or Paul, you know.
I
Thank
think it
you.
might be 100 megawatts, Emma. So I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
I think it's the amount of energy produced.
Oh, so it's in energy size, not in actual hectares.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
Thank you.
used to be 14, it used to be 50 megawatts, but I think it has increased to 100. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I think there's one in Kent that's coming up, and I think that's an MSIP, and I think that's only 50. But yeah, I think it's somewhere between 50 and
Yeah,
100.
I think it is 50 because Ash Level Solar Farm was 49 and that fell just under the threshold, which is why it wasn't an NSIP from memory. They kept it to kind of the maximum size it could be without it being an NSIP.
I think it might have been raised recently from 50
Okay,
to 100. So I think it depends when the
yeah.
threshold was. Technical tangent there, everybody. Sorry about that. Next, we
Thank
have
you.
a question on spatial strategies, which were mentioned by a couple of you from Georgina, who I will bring in. Georgina, we should be able to hear you. Had a question on spatial strategies that were
Yeah,
mentioned.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, I just wondered, is anyone looking into like more of a strategic spatial planning strategy to identify like priority sites for solar or, preferred sites basically? Or is everyone just working in silos?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if anyone else was going. So Kent Wildlife Trust, we've done a lot of habitat mapping for obviously Kent's local nature recovery strategy. But that's more habitat mapping of where kind of the essential ecological areas kind of are and like a connective corridor. It's not particularly looking at where then developments should be, but obviously you might get an idea of where not to build developments. We're not doing anything, as in Kent Wildlife Trust are not doing anything solely related on solar developments, like mapping, anything like that. But that doesn't mean like other wildlife trusts are. I don't know if RSPB or Buglife are doing anything similar.
So we work with our partners, and we're doing it. The partners that we work with do it naturally, but I think it's something that we're actually calling for on a much more on a national and a regional level. That it needs to be embedded in national guidance.
I agree. I mean, I work with offshore wind developments and planning, spatial planning for that, and obviously the Crown Estate being quite proactive in sort of identifying, key priority areas for renewables. But that's obviously offshore. But it'd be nice to see something onshore for a change.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, we have a question around slightly linked, but how do we ensure planning decisions ensure that solar is placed in the right places? So this was from Karen asking around, there's a lot of solar farms being consented at the moment, and she was asking, how do we ensure these are approved in the right places? Does anyone want to come in on that, or?
I think it was sort of partly answered by Emma for the previous question. I know, well, I suppose I've got two things from sort of Buglife's point of view. One, we've been working, because we're a very small organisation, it's not something we've been able to sort of work on by ourselves, but we've worked with Wildlife and Countryside Link to try and shape and develop policy in land use, and that's something that we try and input into. And I mean, I must admit, again, because I work across the whole of the UK, so I don't get so much of an insight into sort of local development plans of specific councils. But I'm wondering if they are starting now to, they certainly should be trying to identify sites maybe. But I suppose there isn't a sort of, unlike housing, there isn't sort of an allocation, as far as I know, of sort of like, oh, well, obviously each region has to have so much, renewable energy allocation. I don't think that's the case. And all that, something that Buglife have done to try and highlight some of the most sensitive habitats to invertebrates for decision makers is our important invertebrate areas, which you can see mapped on our important invertebrate area page. So we've tried to, because invertebrates often their habitats don't get as well recognised sometimes as other wildlife, we've tried to do very fine scale mapping of particular areas of the country where they're very sensitive habitats for invertebrates, which again, depending on the development, it might just sort of highlight that it needs to be considered and thought about. So that's something we've done just to try and raise the profile of invertebrates in planning. I hope that's helpful.
I just, if I have time to quickly add that, something that obviously a lot of wildlife trusts are advocating for, and Paul mentioned it as well, is actually having something in policy about new housing developments having to have renewable energy, within the new development, whether that's air source heat pumps or solar panels. I mean, ideally, we should be incorporating solar panels on existing infrastructure, such as houses and, council-owned buildings and things like that. We don't really necessarily want to be building all these solar farms in these ecologically important habitats. The kind of most simple solution does seem to be building it on existing infrastructure. So a lot of wildlife trusts do advocate for that, and when we do kind of national like things with the national, like the planning policy statements and things like that, that's a policy we always try to push for, but it's not quite been successful yet.
Thanks, Emma. And I think the other thing that I would just add is that obviously on a local level, the more anybody can engage with these planning applications to kind of raise concerns, if there is a concern, relocation, or to champion for some of the opportunities for biodiversity enhancements that have been discussed by everybody today, then that obviously is an opportunity to influence as well. Just conscious that we're running slightly over. I'll just take 2 more questions, and then what we'll do with the other questions is we will put them to the panel and get the answers to you via the Sussex and Kent Planning Networks for Nature. So don't worry, we'll make sure all questions are answered, but we'll just take 2 more before we wrap up today. We've got a question here, which I think is a really interesting one from Pamela Hunter. So I'll just bring you in, Pamela, to ask about management.
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
We can.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Obviously, from the comments made from the speakers, very good, everyone. Thank you. It sounds as if management, you say time and again, management of them. I'm in the position of, I was on a group that were complaining at a solar farm planned very, very close from a landowner who is currently extraordinarily bad landowner. So who does this management? They have got approval, and we're still waiting to see what's going to happen. It's apparently changed hands of the people who are going to develop it. From what I saw when this was going on, the people going for these, they're not green companies at all. They're massive organizations. The particular one here is based in the States. They offer the landowner all sorts of wonderful amounts of money, which is why this is not a farmer, but many of them are farmers. You can understand them accepting it. But who is actually going to do the management? Because the landowner here around me is awful. I mean, he's just dreadful. You know, hedges slashed down so low they're of very little value. And they also spray out nasty weeds because they don't look nice. So they lead one to believe that if the management's left to them, it won't be very good. And we keep seeing these wonderful pictures of flower-rich meadows. But surely we all know that they are desperately difficult to get. A bit of rough old grassland does not turn into a beautiful flower-rich meadow. And even if it does, it's got to be maintained. It's got to be cut at the right time. So who's going to do it?
Do you want me to answer that? So it should have gone through planning, and there will be documents embedded in the planning application that are a legal requirement. So there'll be a landscape and environment management plan, and more recently with biodiversity net gain, there's a biodiversity net gain plan, which are you can hold the operator to account with, because that's a legal document through the planning process that they said would be achieved for the 30 or 40 years of the site, and even put in how the site will be decommissioned as well. So I would check.
But who is the operative? Who is the operative? The landowner or the people building the solar farm?
The owner, I'd have thought, would have been. I would just go through the planning application and just see exactly what was proposed.
I think what Paul's trying to say is that in each case it won't always be the same. So I'm aware of some solar farms where they buy the land and then sort of hire people in to do the maintenance work that's set out in the documents Paul mentioned, and then similarly ones where they sort of rent the land and the existing owner will continue to do the management. So it will probably depend with each solar farm, maybe set up slightly differently, but in those documents about the consenting of the planning permission, it needs to set out who will be responsible for the management going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. One final question. there's so many to choose, some really good ones as well that I'm looking through. Shall we bring, there's a question here from Murray about mapping. Well, 2 questions about mapping. Murray, I'll bring you in. We should be able to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's simply, I'm just trying to get my head around the sheer scale of applications that seem to be coming in. Always hearing about more solar farms coming up and huge ones. It'd be great to just see a map of it exists anywhere with anybody on the solar farms that are already constructed and those that are proposed and well, proposed for construction, just to be able to ascertain the sort of scale of loss of farmland and where that's occurring with distribution of farmland birds, etc. And also just, you know, in terms of the location of these farms, presumably now that we've got the LNRS out there, that should be paying regard to the more sensitive areas in terms of being deflected elsewhere or having to put in bigger mitigation.
Yeah, I think that's something that would be really useful. Again, I'm not sure if it's being done. So at Kent Wildlife Trust, we do map all developments that we comment on. So we do have a map of a lot of the solar farms, but obviously we're a very small team of 2 people. So unfortunately, we can't comment on every single application, and we do have to have a prioritization system and kind of pick the worst of the bunch. So we do have some sort of mapping where the ones that we've commented on, whether or not we can share that, I would have to ask. But yeah, no, I agree that there should be something where we can see kind of the scale of solar farm applications. It'd be very useful, but I'm not sure if anyone is specifically doing that.
Okay, thanks, Emma.
There is a website called Renewable Energy Database, and but you do have to filter it because there's dots everywhere and it includes all energy and all different types of renewables. So you have to filter out for particular solar farms, otherwise you'll get people's rooftop solar and everything. But it does show ones that are going through that. You can also filter sites that are going pre-planning or operational.
Thanks, Paul. That sounds really helpful. If you could provide that link, I can send it round to everybody following the webinar, so they can have that. Fantastic. Well, I'm aware that we've still got a whole load of questions, so I will put those to the panel and we'll put the answers to those on the network. I'd just like to say a big thank you to Emma, Gemma and Paul for joining us this evening and providing some really interesting discussion around solar farms. And thanks to everyone else for joining us. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry I was late.